Hi, I'm Ashley Isaacs, the Director of Children and Youth Ministry at Columbia Methodist Church. Welcome to our Church Safe Sanctuary training video. This training is required for all of our staff and volunteers who work with children and youth. If you missed the last in-person training, please pay close attention throughout this whole video and then come see me at church for a brief interview. After verifying that you understand the major points explained in this video, you will be granted a training certificate that is valid for working with children and youth until the end of the next calendar year. There is also a criminal background check that is required each year as well, but I will explain all of that a little later in the video. First, I would like to talk about what a safe sanctuary policy is and define some of the key terms in it. As Christians, we are called to create a safe sanctuary in our churches. The church must be a holy, safe, and protective community for all of God's children, regardless of age or ability. The purpose of this policy is to address the safety of our children and youth while at this church or at events sponsored by this church. Safe sanctuary procedures are in place firstly to help prevent the opportunity for the occurrence and/or the appearance of abuse of children and youth. And secondly, to help protect workers from false accusations and/or suspicions. This policy exists to protect the whole church. The scope of this policy and its provisions shall apply to all persons, including paid and unpaid adults and youth assistants, whether lay or clergy, who have any direct or indirect contact with children and youth, who participate in any activities or events at this church or are sponsored by this church. In this policy, the term church refers to Columbia Methodist Church, located at 315 South 16th Street in West Columbia, Texas. An adult is anyone 18 years of age or older. A youth assistant is anyone under the age of 18 who may work with children and youth only when supervised by another adult. State law allows the paid employment of youth who are 16 years of age or older. And should the church hire such an individual, that person is required to undergo safe sanctuary training as set forth by this policy and must also submit to a background check and reference checks provided in this policy. The term person used in this policy is defined as all paid and unpaid adults and youth assistants, whether lay or clergy, who have any direct or indirect contact with children and youth who participate in any activities or events at this church or sponsored by this church. The word abuse is defined as, but not limited to, verbal abuse, physical abuse, and sexual abuse. Verbal abuse is a verbal act intended to humiliate, degrade, or threaten. Physical abuse is any act or omission of an act that endangers a child or youth's physical health. Sexual abuse is any sexual conduct harmful to a child or youth's mental, emotional, or physical health. Now, I'd like to talk about the screening process for any staff or volunteer who wishes to work with children or youth, for adults or minors who wish to serve as youth assistants. This process will include a criminal background check, but may also include checks of personal and/or professional references. Prior to employment or acceptance as a volunteer, the applicant will complete an authorization and consent to a criminal background check. Also, by signing this authorization form, the applicant gives permission to this church to contact references and perform whatever investigation is deemed necessary to complete the review of the application. The results of this screening process shall be kept confidential. Accurate records and documentation of all screens will be kept current and confidential by this church. All persons, once accepted, shall be screened annually. An applicant found to have been involved in or convicted of any activity in which the applicant abused or exploited children or youth will not be approved. This church reserves the right to turn away any person for service and holds complete and sole discretion in acceptance or non-acceptance of an applicant. All persons undergoing the screening process will be required to sign a disclosure form informing them of their right to access any reports used in the application process. Membership in the church for at least 6 months is required before being eligible to volunteer as a helper with children or youth. Membership for 1 year is required before being eligible to lead any children or youth programming. Once approved, all volunteers are expected to learn and follow the rules of this policy at the time in the children and youth programs of the church. All Safe Sanctuary certified adults and youth assistants will conduct themselves in an appropriate manner that always displays dedication to the mental, physical, and spiritual well-being of the children and youth of this church. Any conduct unbecoming of this church's charge to provide a holy and safe and protective community for all God's children, or is in violation of this policy, will result in immediate removal from contact with the children and youth of this church. This determination is at the discretion of the senior pastor and/or the director of children and youth. There are also some boundaries involving social media use as well. Obviously, we cannot police your Facebook profiles, but as a volunteer and someone who works with children and youth, please be mindful of what you're posting. Ask yourself, would I mind if my pastor reads this? If you have to question it, maybe you should think twice about posting it. People want to know that their children are surrounded by loving, Christ-minded individuals who pour into their children each week. Also, as a volunteer of the church, you should not have any direct communication with a youth on social media without consent from their parents. One of the biggest ways to provide accountability and safety to both the volunteers and children and youth they supervise is to follow the two-worker rule in all children and youth ministry settings of the church. Simply stated, the two-worker rule requires no fewer than 2 adults always present during any church-sponsored program, event, or ministry involving children. Risk will be reduced even more if the 2 adults are not related. The nursery is to be tended by at least 2 adults. A Sunday school class for children is always led by at least 2 adults. A Bible study group for youth is always taught by at least 2 adults. The youth fellowship group is always staffed with at least 2 adults. The significance of this rule cannot be overstated. A church will drastically reduce the possibility of an incident of child abuse if this rule is followed. Abusers thrive on secrecy, isolation, and their ability to manipulate victims. When abusers know that they will never have a chance to be alone with a potential victim, they quickly lose interest in working with the children. Thus, the children are protected, and the church has greatly reduced the likelihood of an allegation of child abuse. Furthermore, vigilant adherence to the two-worker rule provides important protection to the church workers with the children and youth. Even small churches can adhere to this rule by using assigned adult floaters who move in and out of the rooms. Sometimes there are not 2 adults here for every room, and when that happens, a second person must be willing to go back and forth from room to room to help out however possible. Parents and children who know that 2 adults will be present are less likely to make false allegations because they know that it would be nearly impossible to prove allegations against 2 workers. Church members will be more confident when they volunteer to work with children, knowing that they will never bear the total burden of leadership and knowing that the church has made a commitment to protecting them as well as the children. The room arrangements and visibility with other adults is another issue. All doors of classrooms and gatherings must remain unlocked. Each room set aside for children and youth should have a door with a window in it or a half door. There should be unobstructed visibility to all activities where children and youth are present. Changing a diaper and assisting a young child with the bathroom if needed should take place where the worker and the child is in sight with the child's privacy protected. When it comes to any physical contact with our children and youth, it is important to only do so according to the boundaries and limited ways that our church deems safe and appropriate. Our church is committed to creating and promoting a positive, nurturing environment for our children and youth ministries that protect our children and youth from abuse and our church personnel from misunderstandings. When creating safe boundaries for children and youth, it is important to establish what types of affection are appropriate and inappropriate. Otherwise, that decision is left up to each individual. Stating which behaviors are appropriate and inappropriate allows church personnel to comfortably show positive affection in ministry, and yet identify individuals who are not maintaining safe boundaries with children and youth. These guidelines are based in large part on avoiding behaviors known to be used by child molesters to groom children and or youth and their parents for future abuse. The following guidelines are to be carefully followed by all church personnel working around or with children or youth. Love and affection are a part of church life and ministry. There are many ways to demonstrate affection while maintaining positive and safe boundaries with children and youth. Examples of positive and appropriate demonstrations of affection: brief hugs, pats on the shoulder or back, handshakes, or high fives and fist bumps, verbal praise, touching hands, faces, and shoulders and arms of children or youth, arms around the shoulder, holding hands while walking with small children, sitting beside small children, kneeling or bending down for hugs with small children, holding hands during prayer, pats on the head when culturally appropriate. For example, this gesture should typically be avoided in some Asian communities. Inappropriate demonstrations of affection with children and youth in ministry settings are commonly used by child molesters or predators to groom children for later molestation and are some forms of sexual abuse themselves. Here are inappropriate behaviors to avoid. Inappropriate or lengthy embraces, kisses on the mouth, holding children over 3 years old in your lap, touching bottoms, chest, or genital areas other than for appropriate diaper changing or toiletry of infants and toddlers, showing affection in isolated areas such as bedrooms, closets, staff-only areas, or private rooms, occupying a bed with a child or youth, touching knees or legs of children or youth, wrestling with children or young or the youth, tickling children or youth, piggyback rides, any type of massages given by children or youth to an adult, any type of massages given by an adult to a child or youth, any form of unwanted affection, comments or compliments related to physical or body development. Examples would be, "You're sure developing," or "You look really hot in those jeans." Snapping bras or giving wedgies or similar touch of underwear, whether or not it's covered by other clothing, is off limits. Giving gifts or money to individual children or youth. Private meals with individual children or youth should not be shared. Now, I'd like to talk about our policy regarding disciplinary procedures. Children, youth, and parents will be made aware that appropriate behavior is always expected in the church and at all church events. In no case is physical discipline an appropriate measure to deal with inappropriate behavior. All persons working with children and youth in this church will adhere to a designated chain of commands should they need assistance with behavior issues. Parents will be notified of any behavior issues requiring intervention. Let me explain why we have a disciplinary policy. When a child spends time at CMC, it is the heart-filled desire of the staff and volunteers that these are the best hours of a child's week. Periodically, children are disruptive and even disrespectful to their teachers and peers. The purpose of having a discipline policy is to ensure if a child's behavior affects the opportunity for them and other children to have a positive learning experience during any youth or children's ministry program, that there is a plan in place that benefits everyone. The church discipline policy does not identify specific behaviors that are not acceptable. It does identify positive expectations for the children. These expectations give the children and the teacher an outline from which to encourage and teach positive behavior. Briefly stated, here are the expectations of the church. Honor God's house. Walk inside the building. Use the furniture the right way. Honor God's followers. Sit and listen when someone else is talking. Raise your hand for permission to speak. Obey your teacher or leader. Honor God's child. Prepare your heart to worship God by removing distractions like toys and games. Teachers and leaders may establish additional house rules, which may be more specific than these expectations. An example of a house rule could be: visit the restroom before class, get a drink before class, no cell phones during lesson time, or if a child's behavior is disruptive to others following, these steps will be taken. The child will be asked to stop specific behaviors. If the child continues to disrupt the class, they may be asked to set out of activities. As a last resort, the child will be asked to leave the classroom and return to their parents. Children are welcome to return to the classroom when their behavior improves. If there has been a consistent behavioral problem, parents will be asked to offer suggestions to encourage better behavior and possibly be invited to join their child the following week. Again, the goal is to provide an environment conducive for all children to enjoy their experience while participating in any children's programming. Anytime a child is reprimanded with more than a verbal warning, asked to sit out of activities, the director of children's ministry should be made aware. Parent counseling should be done by the children's director as well. Another important job of those working with children and youth in this church is to be aware and looking for signs of child abuse or neglect that may be present in their home. Child abuse and neglect are common. Here are some statistics about it that may surprise you. At least 1 in 7 children have experienced child abuse or neglect in the past year in the United States. This is likely an underestimate because many cases are unreported. In 2020, 1,750 children died of abuse or neglect in the United States. Children living in poverty experience more abuse and neglect. Experiencing poverty can place a lot of stress on families, which may increase the risk for child abuse and neglect. Rates of child abuse and neglect are 5 times higher for children and families with low socioeconomic status. Child maltreatment is costly. In the United States, the total lifetime economic burden associated with child abuse and neglect was about $592 billion. This economic burden rivals the cost of other high-profile public health problems, such as heart disease and diabetes. Child abuse and neglect are serious public health problems and adverse childhood experiences. They can have long-term impacts on health, opportunity, and well-being. This issue includes all types of abuse and neglect of a child under the age of 18 by parent, caregiver, or another person in a custodial role, such as a religious leader, a coach, or a teacher, that results in harm and the potential for harm or a treatment of harm to a child. There are 4 common types of abuse and neglect. Physical abuse is the intentional use of physical force that can result in physical injury. Examples including hitting, kicking, shaking, burning, or others show a force against a child. Sexual abuse involves pressuring or forcing a child to engage in sexual acts. It includes behaviors such as fondling, penetration, the exposure of a child to other sexual activities. Please see the CDC's Child Sexual Abuse webpage for more information. Emotional abuse refers to behaviors that harm a child's self-worth or emotional well-being. Examples include name-calling, shaming, rejecting, withholding love, and threatening. Neglect is the failure to meet a child's basic physical and emotional needs. These needs include housing, food, clothing, education, access to medical care, and having feelings validated and appropriately responded to. Children suffering from abuse often will not tell anyone about it. Therefore, it is important to be able to recognize other signs or indicators of abuse. The following characteristics may be indicators of abuse, although they are not necessarily proof. Individually, any one of the indicators may be signs of several less serious problems. When these indicators are observed in a child, they can be considered as warnings and lead you to investigate the situation further. Possible signs of physical abuse include the following: hostile and aggressive behavior towards others, fearfulness of parents and/or other adults, destructive behaviors to self, others, and property, inexplainable fractures or bruises, inappropriate for child's development, burns, facial injuries, patterns of repetitious bruises. Possible signs of emotional abuse include these characteristics: exhibit severe depression and/or withdrawal, exhibit severe lack of self-esteem, failure to thrive, threatens or attempts suicide, speech and/or eating disorders, goes to extremes to seek adults' approval, extreme passive-aggressive behavior patterns. Possible signs of neglect include the following: failure to thrive, pattern of inappropriate dress for climate, begs or steals food, chronic hunger, depression, untreated medical conditions, poor hygiene. Possible signs of sexual abuse include the following: unusually sexually advanced knowledge and/or behavior for child's age and/or development stage, depression, cries often for no apparent reason, promiscuous behavior, runs away from home and refuses to return, difficulty walking or sitting, bruised, bleeding in vaginal or anal areas, exhibits frequent headaches, stomach aches, or extreme fatigue, sexually transmitted disease. In addition to these indicators, children who have been sexually abused at church may exhibit some of the following signs: unusual nervousness or anxiety about being left in the nursery or Sunday school classes, reluctance to participate in church activities that were previously enthusiastic about. Comments such as, "I don't want to be alone with blank," in reference to a child care worker or Sunday school teacher. Nightmares, including a child care worker or teacher as a frightening character. Unexplained hostility toward a child care worker or teacher. Child abuse occurs every minute of every day, and it occurs in every community. Child abuse occurs in every economic, racial, ethnic, religious, and/or other demographic groups. As Christians, we are called to be vigilant in protecting the children in our midst and in preventing child abuse in the community of faith. Let me speak a little about the people who abuse children and youth. To prevent child abuse in our churches, we must not only recognize the signs of abuse, but we must recognize that the abusers of our children are more often than not familiar adults trusted by the children. Just as children from all segments of our society are victims of child sexual abuse, it is also true that abusers come from all segments of society. Abusers can be found in every racial, ethnic, economic, and social group. When they are identified, they look very much like us. Some are charismatic leaders. Some are very sociable. Some are very sympathetic to troubled children. Some are married and have children of their own. Some are young, even as young as 14 or 15, and some are older adults. More than 60% of child abusers who are caught abuse again. It is common for the child abuser to have dozens and dozens of victims. So, what do we do when we see signs of abuse present? When an adult leader of an event or activity suspects that abuse or any suspected violation of the Texas Penal Code is taking place or has taken place, he or she shall call 911 when needed and report the abuse to the appropriate law enforcement agency and/or Child Protective Services. The adult leader shall contact the administrator or event leader immediately, notify the senior pastor, and cooperate fully with the investigation conducted by the local law enforcement officials or Child Protective Services. Address any needs the child or youth may have, medical or otherwise. Report to the parents and/or legal guardians. The person suspected of abuse, the respondent, shall, for the safety and well-being of children or youth, be removed with dignity from further contact with the children and youth until an appropriate investigation has taken place. The matter shall remain confidential. If the adult event leader is the respondent, then the report should be made to that person's supervisor. Following the report of an incident, the adult event leader or supervisor in charge shall document the report and then speak with the alleged victim, being careful to use open-ended questions. All such conversations shall be documented. Careful and confidential documentation is essential. The documentation should include the following: the name of the adult leader observing or receiving the disclosure of abuse, including the date, time, and place, and any action taken by this person. Any statement made by the alleged victim. Name of the respondent. The date, time, and place of any conversations or any statements made by the respondent. Any action taken, like suspensions of the respondent. Date and time of the call to the appropriate agency, the name of the worker spoken to, and the contents of that conversation, and case numbers assigned. Date and time of the call to the law enforcement agencies, name of officer spoken to, and content of that conversation. Date and time of any other contacts made regarding this incident. Any inquiries made by the media with regards to an investigation or allegations of abuse shall be directed to the senior pastor of this church. No person shall give out any information without explicit authorization. Thank you for completing the video component of our training. Volunteers like you bring energy and heart to our ministry. Through your selfless dedication, we are able to teach and bring the love of God to the children and youth of Columbia Methodist Church and beyond. Please do contact me for a brief interview about what you learned here so that A certificate of safe sanctuary training can be made for you. Thank you for your time in this important training and interest in the children and youth ministries of Columbia Methodist Church.